Nurses, don't walk this corridor without an attending.
Nurses don't walk this corridor without an attending.
Did you say that
One
to me?
arm across the hallway. One badge held up like a crossing guard's flag. Avery Strand's voice carried the particular confidence of a man who had never once been wrong about who belonged where. And the two residents at the nursing station behind him had stopped moving the moment his arm went up, stylus raised mid-air, retractable ID reels swinging free, both of them absolutely still.
Whatever you're delivering, leave it at the station. This wing has protocols.
I believe you'll want to see this first.
The woman on the other side of Strand's outstretched palm did not step back. She stopped one pace from his hand, spine straight. A sealed manila envelope held at her right side, small silver hoop earrings catching the lead light overhead. A black woman in her 40s, lean and precise, charcoal wool blazer over a white collarless button-up, dark navy trousers, black ankle boots. No white coat. No hospital badge visible on her body anywhere. She looked at Strand with the expression of a diagnostician looking at a presenting symptom, not reactive, not threatened, just collecting. Strand's eyes dropped to the envelope. Blue stamp across the face, Office of the Chief of Medicine. He read it. His eyes came back to her face. The badge stayed up. Whatever you're delivering, he said, leave it at the station. This wing has protocols. She lifted the envelope level with his eye line, not handing it yet, just making him read the stamp again. This one's for you, Dr. Strand, she said. But here's what Avery Strand didn't know. The woman holding that sealed envelope had secured a $9, 1 million federal research grant with Harmon Medical Center's name on it, had been formally appointed Chief of Medicine at 6 o'clock that morning, and had spent the previous 3 weeks walking every floor of this hospital in plain clothes, annotating his department's records in a consulting office 2 floors below, building a case that was going to be sitting open in front of him at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Have you ever watched someone mistake the ceiling for the floor and then realize the moment they recognize the error is the moment everything shifts? But before we get to that, let me take you back 6 hours to a board meeting that Avery Strand was never invited to attend. It is 2:47 in the morning. A Tuesday, 6th floor of Harmon Medical Center, Chicago, in a corner conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and Lake Michigan gone flat and dark below. The hospital's board of directors has been in session since 10 p.m. and they have now voted 7-1 to appoint Renata Cole as Chief of Medicine. Effective immediately, the dissenting vote was cast by proxy from a board member in San Francisco who believed the hospital needed more time to assess internal candidates. The 7 who voted yes have been watching Harmon's clinical leadership slowly calcify for nearly a decade, and they decided that was enough time given. By 6 in the morning, Board Chair Patricia Wynn has signed the letter, sealed it with the red wax crest stamp, and brought it down to Renata's 3rd-floor consulting office. The consulting office is a bare, windowless room with a folding table and a single monitor and fluorescent overhead and stacks of department files on every horizontal surface, color-coded tabs, margin notes in red and blue and black, yellow legal pads covered in Renata's careful handwriting. Wynn sets the sealed envelope on the desk beside the mug from Renata's previous hospital, Philadelphia, 7 years as chief there, and says, I'd like you to deliver this personally. To the floor, this morning, yourself, Renata looks at the envelope. She looks at the files. She picks up her Philadelphia mug and says, yes. Renata Cole is 46 years old, double board certified in internal medicine and pulmonology. She held a chief role at a Philadelphia academic hospital for 7 years, rebuilt its clinical governance structure, negotiated a nursing contract that ended a 3-year staffing crisis, published 2 landmark papers on pulmonary outcomes in post-surgical patients before Patricia Wynne called her on a Thursday evening, described Harmon Medical Center as a hospital losing its clinical culture to interior politics, and asked if Renata would be willing to take a look. Renata asked what losing its clinical culture to interior politics meant in specific terms. Wynne described a surgical wing that had operated as a personal fiefdom for 9 years, with a chief of cardiothoracic surgery who had effectively built his own institution inside the institution. His scheduling preferences, his budget practices, his unwritten codes about who moved where in his corridor and how they moved. She said the results were showing in incident patterns that the board could see in the data, but could not pinpoint because the data was being reported through channels the same man influenced. Renata said she would take 3 weeks, no fee, in exchange for full file access across every department. Wynne agreed. Renata arrived on a Monday morning in her consulting clothes, the charcoal blazer, the navy trousers, the silver hoops, the Philadelphia mug carried, because it distinguished her as something without identifying her as anything. And she began working. Before Harmon, before Philadelphia, before the board certifications and the landmark papers and the federal grants, there was a girl in Baltimore who grew up watching her grandmother manage 3 jobs and a body that kept failing her. Renata was 12 years old when her grandmother was discharged from a hospital in a condition no one in the family fully understood, with paperwork that nobody explained, with a medication schedule that assumed a literacy level her grandmother did not have. Renata sat at the kitchen table and read the discharge instructions aloud and translated the clinical language into sentences her grandmother could follow, and she understood in that moment that the distance between a patient and the information they needed was not medical. It was institutional. It was a system that processed people rather than treated them. She decided at 12 that she was going to be the person inside that system who made it function differently. Not reform it from outside. Get inside it and make it work. She was not alone in that kitchen in Baltimore in understanding that gap. Many children of that generation sat at similar tables, translating similar paperwork for grandparents and parents who had worked entire lives inside systems designed to be legible only to the people who built them. What distinguished Renata was not the observation, but the decision she made about it, which was precise, not to be the person who explains the system to the people excluded from it, but to be the person inside the system with enough authority to change what it explains and how. That decision, made at 12 at a kitchen table in Baltimore over discharge paperwork, that a woman who had worked 40 years of night shifts deserved to understand, organized every subsequent choice she made. She was the first person in her family to finish college. She put herself through medical school on scholarships and loans and 2 years of weekend emergency department shifts that she does not describe as sacrifice because she does not believe in describing necessary things that way. Her residency was at Johns Hopkins. Her fellowship was in pulmonology at the University of Chicago. She published her first paper at 31, her second at 34, and the one that became a landmark, a 12-year retrospective on post-surgical pulmonary outcomes in Black patients, controlling for every variable anyone had tried to control for, and finding what nobody wanted to find, which was a persistent gap that could not be explained by the variables. She published at 38. 2 years after she became chief in Philadelphia, in a journal that had rejected her original submission with a letter she kept for exactly the reason she kept it. She went to Philadelphia at 39 and inherited a nursing contract dispute that had been grinding for 3 years and which her predecessor had managed by avoiding it. She sat down with the union representatives on a Thursday morning with the financial statements and the staffing data and the incident logs, and she told them what she could give and what she could not. And she explained the logic of each constraint in terms that did not require anyone to simply trust her. And she came back with a contract 17 days later that both sides signed. The staffing crisis ended. Incident rates on the affected floors dropped 14% in the following 18 months. She wrote an internal paper on the methodology that the hospital's administration did not publish, but that she kept a copy of because it was correct. Patricia Wynne had read the landmark paper. She had tracked Renata's administrative record through professional channels for 2 years before she made the call. When she described Harmon as a hospital losing its clinical culture to interior politics, she was offering a diagnosis she had already made and was asking Renata to confirm it. Renata asked for 3 weeks and full file access because she does not confirm diagnoses without evidence. She walked every floor. She attended morning rounds on every ward without identifying herself, standing at the back of the group with a legal pad, and not one attending physician asked who she was, because in a large teaching hospital there are always people with legal pads who have not yet been introduced. She watched how residents presented their cases, how senior staff handled pushback, which questions were welcomed and which caused a subtle stiffening in the room. She read the incident logs and near-miss reports for the previous 2 years on the 4th floor surgical wing, and she found a pattern. Not random, not systemic failure, but the particular shape that emerges when a department has been run as one person's territory for long enough that the people inside it have developed quiet reflexes about what to file and what to resolve before it gets to filing. She reviewed the cardiothoracic unit's budget allocations for the current fiscal year and found a $140,000 discretionary override that had been approved without board sign-off, without any documented medical necessity, signed by one person in a unit managed by that same person. She wrote that department's name on a yellow legal pad and circled it twice and put a star beside the circle. On the second week, she sat in on a nursing staff meeting on the 4th floor. She introduced herself as a consultant, reviewing clinical workflow. Nobody asked which firm. She took notes on the staffing ratios, the overtime distribution, the way the charge nurse answered questions with the particular precision of someone who has learned to be careful about what she says in certain rooms. Renata noted all of it. Some of it went in the margin of her legal pad. Some of it went in her memory, which was the kind of memory that holds institutional patterns the way a physician holds diagnostic patterns, not by listing them, but by shape and weight and what they predict. On the 3rd week, she ate lunch in the cafeteria on a Tuesday, and a second-year resident sat across from her with a tray and asked if she was a new hospitalist. She said she was a consultant. He said he hadn't seen her around before. She said she had been there 3 weeks. He looked at her Philadelphia mug, glanced at her legal pad. She had closed it, but the cover with the hospital's logo from her last position was visible, and said, "That's Philadelphia's mug." She said it was. He nodded and ate his sandwich and left without asking anything else. She watched him walk back toward the elevator bank and put a small star beside his name on her current page. James Okafor. She had already noted his name from a Tuesday morning rounds presentation 2 weeks earlier. Differential built to the 3rd level, spoken from memory without notes. ordered correctly even when the attending interrupted to challenge the second assumption. That kind of resident either becomes a very good physician or gets beaten out of his habits by a department culture that doesn't reward that kind of thinking. She intended to find out which was happening. The fourth-floor nursing station, she had observed, operated with a particular quality of wariness on Tuesdays. Not all Tuesdays. Tuesdays, when Strand was scheduled for a full morning of rounds, which was a predictable pattern she had confirmed by checking the posted schedule against the incident log entries and finding that low-level procedural irregularities, minor documentation gaps, small deviations from protocol that would normally be flagged internally, clustered in the 24 hours following his Tuesday rounds, which suggested something about the working conditions his presence created that she did not need to speculate about because the data told her what she needed to know. She had her case built by the end of that third week. Tabbed, flagged, annotated, cross-referenced. The $140,000 override was the clearest item, but not the only one. There were scheduling practices that preferentially routed the most complex surgical cases to one attending, which should have appeared in the data as a quality control measure, but appeared instead in the incident logs as a concentration of liability. There were staffing decisions that had been made at the departmental level that should have required Chief of Medicine sign-off under the hospital's own bylaws. Decisions that had been made for 9 years without that sign-off because there had been no Chief of Medicine in functional authority over the surgical wing in 9 years. The night before the board vote, she told Wynne about the $1 million federal pulmonology research grant she had been awarded the previous spring. She had been holding it, attached to her name, waiting for the right institution. She told Wynne she was bringing it to Harmon as part of her appointment. Wynne was quiet for a moment, and then said, "That changes the vote count." Renata said, she knew. Patricia Wynne had been board chair for 4 of those 9 years and a board member for 6 years before that. She had watched 3 chiefs of medicine come and go in the decade of Strand's ascendance. One retired, one relocated for family, one left for an academic position at a university hospital in the southeast that offered what Harmon could not, which was a surgical wing that answered to the chief and not the reverse. She had read each exit interview and noted the same pattern that Renata would later find in the incident logs. The answer to what made your role difficult was never about resources or patient volume or funding. It was always about one flaw, one set of practices, one man who had been in place long enough that the institution had begun to organize itself around his presence the way a tree grows around a fence post, accommodating the fixed object until the accommodation becomes invisible. Wynne had tried 2 internal approaches before she called Renata. The first was a governance review conducted by an outside consultant who produced a 40-page report that recommended procedural changes none of, which touched the underlying problem because the consultant had been briefed by people who worked on the same floor as the underlying problem and had calibrated their candor accordingly. The second was a direct conversation with Strand in this same corner office, which had been occupied by an interim chair at the time, in which Strand had been polite, professionally engaged, and entirely certain that the concerns being raised were theoretical rather than practical, because the numbers in his department were good, and good numbers were the metric that mattered. The numbers were good. That was true. The numbers were also the metric Strand controlled, which Wynne understood but could not demonstrate until someone with clinical expertise and full file access demonstrated it for her. That was what 3 weeks and a charcoal blazer and a Philadelphia mug produced, In the end, the demonstration. The vote was 7-1 at 2:47 in the morning. At 8:44 on the morning after the vote, Renata takes the elevator from the 3rd floor to the 4th with the sealed envelope at her right side. She has been on this floor every morning for 3 weeks. She knows the yellow wayfinding stripe fades at the junction near the surgical suite doors. She knows the second monitor at the nursing station has a card reader error that has not been entered into the maintenance system in 6 weeks, which tells her something specific about how that floor manages its administrative housekeeping. She knows that Avery Strand arrives at 8:45 on Tuesdays and walks from the elevator bank to the nursing station before entering the suites. She knows everything she needs. Strand rounds the elevator bank corner at 8:47 and sees a black woman in civilian clothes heading toward the surgical wing without a white coat and without a visible badge, and he stops her with one arm. 30 years of operating inside a hierarchy that reads authority through clothing will do that to a person's reflexes. He does not assess. He corrects. The correction is automatic. It has been automatic for a long time. In a corridor where it has always worked, for a simple reason, it has never been wrong before. It is wrong now. Nurses don't walk this corridor without an attending. Not loud. The register of a man who has given this speech before to people who reversed course, and who by reversing course confirmed for him that the speech was correct. Behind him, Okafor has frozen with his stylus raised. Marsh is at his left, retractable ID reel hanging free, both of them watching from the nursing station island. Renata stops one step from his arm. She does not reverse. She does not flinch. She looks at him with the expression of someone running a confirmation of a diagnosis already made. She says nothing yet. Strand's eyes move to the envelope she is carrying. He reads the stamp, Office of the Chief of Medicine, and he reads it the way a man reads something that his existing model has already categorized. Inter-office mail. Administrative delivery. Not a category that changes the present conversation. Whatever you're delivering, leave it at the station. We're not a mailroom. He says it with a small, collegial smile, angled to include the residents, making the three of them a unit, making Renata the person who has wandered into the wrong configuration. The smile is the tell. It is not a friendly smile. It is a performance of friendliness aimed at an audience that is watching, meant to make the correction look reasonable, meant to say, I am being gracious about this, which means you are the one being unreasonable. The sound in the corridor, the ambient hiss of the ventilation system, a PA chime from 2 floors down, and the soft click of Strand's Oxford shoe on the pale grey terrazzo as he shifts his weight forward. The weight shift changes the texture of the confrontation. This is no longer a correction. It is a performance. Renata lifts the sealed envelope to his eye level, not handing it, holding it where the stamp is readable from where he stands. The smile begins to not know what to do with itself. He takes the envelope. She places it into his hand, deliberate, unhurried, the way you put something in a person's hand when you know they are going to open it and there is no version of the next 2 minutes in which they don't. He holds it with the fingers of one hand, the way a man holds something he has already categorized and is now being forced to recategorize. His frameless glasses come off his nose with his left hand. He reads the stamp again without the glasses. He breaks the red wax seal with one thumb. The sound is small and complete, like a lock closing instead of opening. Inside, 2 pages on Harmon Medical Center letterhead. Page 1 is the board resolution, 7 signatures plus 1 noted dissenting. The appointment date and time listed as that morning at 6 o'clock. His department named 3 times in the jurisdiction clause, establishing the chief of medicine's direct authority. Page 2 is the preliminary assessment of the cardiothoracic unit's budget practices. Flagged items highlighted in yellow. Renata's initials at the bottom right. 11 seconds. That is how long Strand stands in the corridor without speaking. 11 seconds. Under the flat LED light, the yellow wayfinding stripe running at his feet. The 2 residents not breathing at the nursing station. The woman who handed him the letter standing 1 step away with the same expression she has had since she stopped in this corridor. Measuring, not waiting. Okafor has not moved since the arm went up. Marsh has pressed her lips together. Neither speaks. Both of them are watching Strand's face do what a face does when a man whose professional certainty has never been tested is reading a document that establishes, in 7 signatures and 22 paragraphs, exactly what he was just wrong about. His face went the color of the off-white wall behind him. Not flushed. The particular gray-white of a man whose system is doing something involuntary. "I'll need that returned by noon," Renata says. The same register she has used since the elevator. Even almost quiet. The precision of someone who has already decided exactly what needs to be said. The original stays with your personnel file. She places the open envelope on the nursing station counter, 1 page inside it, the board resolution still in Strand's hands, with the deliberate placement of a receipt of delivery. Then she turns and walks back toward the elevator bank. She does not look back. You know what that walk looks like. The walk away from a moment that went exactly the way you knew it would, that required nothing from you except presence and preparation and the willingness to stand 1 step from an outstretched arm for 11 seconds. That walk doesn't hurry. It doesn't need the last word. It simply goes. Okafor watches her go. He takes 1 step toward the counter and stops himself. Strand is still standing in the center of the corridor, the board resolution in both hands now, the yellow stripe running straight at his feet, the wayfinding pointing toward the surgical suites, where he has been the undisputed authority for 9 years, and will enter this morning as something different. The corridor is empty, except for him. Let me tell you what 3 weeks of walking a hospital's hallways in plain clothes actually produces, because that is the part of this story that most people miss. It is not reconnaissance. It is not strategy. It is diagnosis. Renata Cole does not describe what she spent 3 weeks doing at Harmon as preparation for the corridor moment. She describes it as the same work she always does, which is finding out what is actually happening in an institution before she decides what the institution needs. What she found at Harmon was not complicated. It was the shape that appears in every institution that has gone ungoverned in one specific area for long enough. A man who confused his authority over a flaw with authority over the institution, who had been so rarely corrected that correction ceased to exist as a category in his mental model of the world. Not malice. Negligence disguised as confidence. The $140,000 override was not embezzlement. It was a man who had stopped asking permission so long ago that he had forgotten permission was a thing that existed. The corridor arm was not cruelty. It was a reflex that had been confirmed as correct enough times that the possibility of its being wrong had ceased to compute. The possibility computed now. Here is something Renata told a resident at her previous hospital on a Friday afternoon in a corridor not unlike this one, when the resident asked her how she had learned to manage situations where the person with institutional authority was not the same as the person with institutional competence. She said, "You don't manage those situations. You document them. You document them thoroughly. You give the institution the evidence it needs to correct itself. And you trust that institutions that are worth saving will use the evidence. The ones that won't, you find that out too, and that information is also useful." Harmon was an institution that would use the evidence. That was Wynn's call, made over years of board work, and Renata trusted it the way she trusted diagnostics, based on available information until new information required a revision. She had not needed to revise it. If you've ever worked somewhere that a single person's certainty about who belonged where shaped what every other person in that building was willing to do, leave a comment. I want to know how many people recognize that corridor, the specific weight of a room after a raised arm, the way it teaches everyone watching exactly what questions they are not supposed to ask. Before we get to 2 o'clock, subscribe if you haven't already. These stories take a long time to build correctly, and more of them are coming, and the next one involves a Memphis freight dock, a $3.8 million contract, and a man who got physically shoved off a platform he had owned for 94 minutes. You don't want to find out you missed it. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Renata Cole sits behind Patricia Wynn's walnut desk for the first time. The corner office, 6th floor, windows facing Lake Michigan. The desk is dark walnut. The chairs across from it are caramel leather. The credenza behind her holds the framed hospital accreditations and a model of the original 1947 Harmon building. This is the Chief of Medicine's office. This is where the Chief of Medicine sits. Renata sits there the way a person sits in a chair they have earned. Wynn is positioned to the left of the desk, slightly behind the desk's line. She is not running this meeting. She is witnessing it. Strand arrives at 2 o'clock exactly. White coat folded over his forearm. Cardiovascular Association pin face down in the breast pocket. He sits in the nearest caramel leather chair. He has spent the hours between 8:47 and 2:00 in the way that precise people spend hours they did not anticipate, by being very controlled and visibly effortful about it. He had returned to the surgical suite after the corridor. He had scrubbed in for his first scheduled procedure and performed it with the particular focus of someone who is managing a competing internal event by refusing to acknowledge the competing internal event. His hands were steady, because his hands are always steady. This is the one thing that cannot be taken from him by a document, and he knows it. And he held on to it for the 6 hours between the corridor and the corner office, the way a man holds on to the one piece of solid ground in a shifting landscape. His residents spent the morning moving around him carefully. The charge nurse on the 4th floor learned about the corridor from Marsh by 9:15. The word moved through the floor the way words move through floors, without announcement, person to person, in the spaces between tasks. By noon, everyone on the 4th floor surgical wing knew that the woman in the charcoal blazer had been delivered a board resolution that morning and had walked away from Dr. Strand without looking back, and that her name was on the appointment letter as Chief of Medicine. Nobody said this to Strand directly. Nobody said anything to Strand directly. They did their work and left the gaps where the acknowledgement would have been, and trusted that he would fill in the meaning. The charge nurse, whose name was Elaine Burke and who had been on the 4th floor for 11 years, spent the mid-morning doing the particular administrative work that gets done when a floor is holding a large fact it has not yet processed, redistributing assignment charts that did not need redistributing, adjusting a supply inventory that was already correct, wiping down a counter that was already clean. She was not avoiding the fact. She was giving it room. She had known for 3 years about the $140,000 override, had known it in the way that charge nurses know budget practices they have no standing to report, and she understood what the document in Strand's hands meant without having read it. She put a small check mark beside a task on her clipboard that she had not actually completed yet, and then she completed it, and then she erased the premature check mark and made a new one. She did this twice before she noticed she was doing it and put the clipboard down. He did. He is not an unintelligent man. He is an intelligent man who has been allowed to function as though intelligence and unchallenged authority were the same thing for long enough that challenging the conflation became unthinkable. The conflation is being corrected. He is sitting in a caramel leather chair in an office that used to belong to an empty title and now belongs to a person. And the person is looking at the performance review folder on the desk in front of her, with the same unhurried precision with which she has looked at everything in this building for 3 weeks. Renata opens the performance review folder and sets it on the desk surface, oriented so it faces him. His department name is at the top of page 1 in 14-point type. She does not wait for him to finish reading before she speaks. She walks him through the $140,000 budget override, line by line, fiscal quarter by fiscal quarter. Each flagged item cross reference to the original approval request and the absence of required documentation. She does not raise her voice. She does not editorialize. She states what the records show. Her annotated reports are tabbed with small yellow flags at the exact document location of each referenced item. Because this is what 3 weeks of preparation produces when the person doing the preparing is very good at their work. She also walks him through the scheduling patterns, the concentration of complex cases, the liability distribution, the staffing decisions made without required sign-off. She uses the word pattern throughout. Because pattern is accurate and because it is more damaging than error, a pattern implies something repeated across time, not a mistake. And Strand hears the distinction clearly because he is, in fact, intelligent. When she finishes the budget items, she closes the performance review folder and sets it on the walnut desk with precisely the weight the moment requires. "I'll need a written response to each flagged item by Friday," she says. The board reviews it Monday. She sets a second folder beside the first. The cardiothoracic unit's restructured reporting lines, the new budget approval thresholds, the revised staffing plan. "This is the new structure," she says. "Your direct reporting line changes effective immediately. Budget requests above $15,000 require Chief of Medicine sign-off. Above $50,000 require full board approval." Strand is looking at the 2 folders on the desk. He has not spoken since he said good afternoon at the door. There is a version of a man in this chair who argues, who questions the board's process, who cites his surgical numbers, who invokes the 9 years of outcomes data in his department as evidence of what the department produces under his leadership. Strand is not that version, not because he lacks the inclination, but because he has read the board resolution and he has read the preliminary assessment and he understands, in the way that intelligent people understand things they do not want to understand, that the argument is over before it started, and that the person sitting across the walnut desk has been 3 floors below him for 3 weeks, reading files he did not know were being read. The Cardiovascular Association pin works itself loose from the breast pocket of the folded coat on his arm and rolls onto the walnut desk with a small definitive tick. He does not pick it up. The pin clipped high on his white coat in the corridor that morning at 8:47. The status marker, the emblem of the hierarchy he had run as his floor, sits face up on the walnut desk surface beside the performance review folder. Wynne reaches across and picks it up. She sets it at the corner of the folder, face up. It is a small gesture. She does not comment on it. She has been waiting 9 years to make exactly this kind of quiet, final, undramatic move. What follows is administrative, which is the most thorough kind of reckoning. By end of week, the $140,000 budget override is reversed. The $140,000 is redirected to nursing staff development, continuing education, professional certification support, the kind of investment that shows up in staffing stability and incident rates within 18 months. This is Renata's first published administrative act. It goes on the hospital's internal communications board Thursday morning. 3 nurses at the 4th floor nursing station read it before the morning shift starts. One of them stands at the counter for a moment after, thinking about a Tuesday in the corridor and a woman in a charcoal blazer, and what it means that these 2 mornings are connected in the way they are. The $9.1 million federal pulmonology research grant is announced Thursday. Renata Cole, named as Principal Investigator, Chief of Medicine, Harmon Medical Center. The grant staffing plan includes 3 nursing positions specified by clinical function. The functions correspond exactly to the 3 nurses who were at the 4th floor nursing station when Strand raised his arm on a Tuesday morning. This is not a coincidence. Renata does not produce coincidences. On Thursday afternoon, James Okafor knocks on the open door of the 6th floor corner office. He stands in the doorway and says, "I wanted to ask whether you needed a second on the pulmonology research team. I have a background in respiratory mechanics from my 3rd year, and I've been following the literature on post-surgical pulmonary outcomes since the Harmon paper in 2022. She says, "Yes, come in." Close the door. He sits in the caramel leather chair. They talk for 40 minutes about the research protocol and his clinical interests and the specific gap he has identified in the existing literature that the grant study design is positioned to address. She listens the way she listened in the corridor that morning, fully, without redirecting, without hurrying him through his point to get to hers. When he leaves, he is on the research team, and the knowing sits in him differently from the other kinds of knowing residency has given him. When he had been in medical school, his 2nd year, a Tuesday afternoon in a lecture hall on the north side of campus, a professor had told the room that the most dangerous doctor in any hospital was not the one who didn't know enough, but the one who was certain they already knew enough. Okafor had written it down and put a star beside it. He had been in enough rooms in his short residency to understand what it looked like in practice. He had never, until this Tuesday morning on the 4th floor corridor, seen what the correction of that condition looked like when it was properly administered. He thought about it for a long time afterward. Not the corridor moment itself, the arm and the envelope and the 11 seconds, but the 3 weeks before it. The woman in the charcoal blazer at the back of rounds, the legal pad, the Philadelphia mug. The work that was not visible. He added a 2nd star to the note in his phone where he had copied the professor's quote. He did not explain why. He would understand why, eventually, when he was the person doing 3 weeks of invisible work before a moment that everyone else would see. He had grown up in a household where his mother was a nurse, a floor nurse, not a chief, not a director, a floor nurse who worked double shifts and came home with her shoes still carrying the sounds of the ward. And he had understood from a young age what the architecture of a hospital actually looked like from below, from the nursing station level, from the level of a person doing the work that kept everything running, while the hierarchy expressed itself in corridor moments and badge placements and the unwritten protocols about who moved where without asking. His mother had never described this bitterness. She had described it as the job, which he understood now was a specific kind of dignity, not pretending the architecture was fair, but doing excellent work inside it anyway. Because the people who needed the work done did not benefit from her stopping to perform grievance. He thought about that too on Thursday afternoon when he walked out of the corner office and onto the elevator. The research team. The 40 minutes of actual conversation. The way the new chief of medicine had listened to what he had to say about the literature gap with the full attention of someone who was not managing a conversation, but actually in one. Strand is still at Harmon. He is a gifted surgeon and the hospital needs his operative outcomes, and Renata has never been interested in purges. She is interested in function. In identifying the pattern that produces suboptimal outcomes and restructuring the pattern, not in removing individuals as symbolic acts. His surgical numbers are strong. His departmental authority has been restructured. His budget requests now route through her office. His coat comes off when he enters her corridor, not because anyone asked him to remove it, but because the coat is a garment that means something in a hierarchy, and the hierarchy has changed. And he knows it. The nurses on the 4th floor notice the coat. They have worked with Strand for years, and they know what that coat means, and they notice when it comes off, and they do not say anything about it. Because some things are noticed without being said. The restructuring of the cardiothoracic unit's reporting lines produced, within 60 days, 3 changes that appeared in the incident log data before they appeared anywhere else. A reduction in near-miss reports concentrated in the post-procedure recovery window. An increase in nursing staff documentation completeness on that floor. And 2 incident flag submissions from personnel who had been on the 4th floor for years without ever filing a flag. Renata did not announce these changes. She noted them in the same legal pad she had used during the 3 weeks of consulting work, in the same careful handwriting, and she kept the pad in the top drawer of the walnut desk for reference. She did not need the data to confirm that the restructuring was working. She had expected it to work because she had diagnosed the problem correctly before she treated it. But she kept the data because keeping the data is the discipline that makes the next diagnosis possible. The sealed envelope sits in the administrative record at the 4th floor nursing station. Delivered in person at 8:47 a.m., Tuesday, wax seal broken. Contents received by recipient. The envelope is a piece of paper now, a record in a file, unremarkable to anyone who opens the drawer and finds it. The moment that broke the seal, 11 seconds of silence in a pale grey corridor, is also unremarkable to a record system. The record system does not capture the color that Strand's face went, or the sound of a cardiovascular association pin landing on a walnut desk, or the way Okafor stood at the nursing station counter without moving after Renata walked to the elevator. But you know those things now, and here is what I want you to sit with. The corridor moment. The outstretched arm. The badge held up. The 11 seconds was not the important moment. The important moment happened 3 weeks earlier, when Renata Cole took the elevator to the third floor in a charcoal blazer with a mug from her previous hospital and a legal pad, and she started reading the files that were available to anyone with access, and that nobody with authority had read in 9 years. The corridor moment was the delivery. The reading was the work. This is the thing about competence that institutions resist understanding. It is not dramatic. It does not announce itself in the corridor the way authority does. It builds in windowless rooms on folding tables, in the margins of legal pads, in the pattern recognition that develops over years of doing the diagnostic work with the same care every time, regardless of whether anyone is watching. 3 weeks in a consulting office that Strand did not know existed, reading files that were available to anyone with access, building a case that did not require anything except accuracy. The drama came after. The work came first. You know this. You have felt the version of this that applies to your own life. The difference between the visible moment when something changes and the invisible hours that made the change possible. The document handed across in a corridor versus 3 weeks of annotated files in a windowless office. The 7 signatures on a board resolution versus the Thursday evening phone call when Wynne said the hospital is rotting and Renata said, "What does that mean specifically?" The work that nobody sees is not less than the moment that everybody does. Have you worked somewhere where one person's certainty about who belongs where shaped what everyone around them was willing to do? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how many people recognize that corridor. The way a raised arm can stop an entire floor from asking questions. If this story stayed with you, like it, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe if you haven't already. More of these are coming, and you won't want to find out you missed one. Next time, a man builds a freight company from a single route no one wanted, signs the biggest contract of his life, and gets physically shoved off the loading dock he acquired ownership of that same morning. That story is next. You don't want to miss it. The sealed envelope is in the administrative file. The yellow wayfinding stripe runs down the corridor, and the woman in the charcoal blazer and the silver hoop earrings is in the corner office on the 6th floor with the lake view, reading the next department's file, the way she has always read files, thoroughly, without announcing herself, and without asking anyone's permission.